Bell was just a uniquely talented man as well. I mean, we're not talking about a guy who just had a party piece. This was a guy who was secretary, treasurer, president of the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, first surgeon appointed to the Royal Hospital for Sick Kids. He also, I mean, famously, I can't not mention this, he famously assisted a guy called Henry Littlejohn in a number of criminal cases in Edinburgh. So there was a real direct Sherlockian, if you like, influence that Joseph Bell brought. Henry Littlejohn was the Director of Medical Jurisprudence, I think. He was a Chief Medical Officer in Edinburgh in the latter half of the 19th century, and was therefore obviously involved in a great many criminal cases, murders and what have you. And the most famous one that he took the assistance of Joseph Bell in was probably the case of Eugene Chantrel, who was a French tutor whose wife, Elizabeth Chantrel, had died apparently from a gas leak in their home. But Joseph Bell and Henry Littlejohn investigated this and found that Eugene Chantrel had been unusually interested in the gas fittings in the home, but had also been buying up a huge amount of morphine in pharmacies over the past few weeks. And conveniently enough, there was a large insurance policy against his wife's life there. So he was eventually found guilty of murdering her. And it's said that he told Henry Littlejohn to give my congratulations to Joseph Bell. He did more than most to bring me to the gallows before he was hung. That was a very famous case and pushed the name of Joseph Bell. Eugene Chantrel, actually, interestingly enough, as Bell was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes, Eugene Chantrel became the inspiration for a very famous literary character, because Robert Louis Stevenson based Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde on Eugene Chantrel, this brilliant man who had a dark side. So that's an interesting little juxtaposition there.
Was Bell integral for going to the scene of the crime and looking at the evidence and identifying Chantrel as the killer, or was it more a support of the investigation?
It's difficult for me, not something I would be able to give a good answer on. I mean, let's be under no illusion, Henry Littlejohn was leading the medical aspect of the investigation. Joseph Bell was assisting him. Bell did not come across as a person who would step on people's toes. I think the story, I mean, the Chantrel story is out there. There's lots of information on it. I think Joseph Bell's part in it has perhaps been overplayed throughout history, because obviously Bell became known as the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes. So the natural association is that he was the main reason that Chantrel was eventually caught. It's probably pushing it to say that, and he was absolutely under no illusions that he was being consulted by Henry Duncan Littlejohn, who was the main lead in that. But the details, I'm afraid, I wouldn't be able to give you on what he actually did in terms of, I can give a vague outline of what the Chantrel murder case was, but I do certainly advise that people look into it, because in terms of Victorian era Gothic Edinburgh murder, it's a really nice true story.
There have been a lot of depictions of Sherlock Holmes throughout history, both in literature, radio, film, television. Which of those, including perhaps Dr. House, would you say most resembled the real Joseph Bell, both in physical attributes and in character?
I think, well, you got is it Basil Rathbone? Was that I can never remember the guy's name, but Doyle, when he wrote about his inspirations in his memoirs, he said, I thought of my old friend Joe Bell with his hawk-like nose and his gait. So I think, anything that's got a sort of narrow nose, I think, because Joseph Bell in the pictures, he does look like a slightly hawkish face there. So I mean, physical depictions, I mean, I haven't got a comprehensive list of everybody who's played Sherlock Holmes. I guess the interesting one about depicting Joseph Bell, as a story I should tell you, is that Brian Cox depicted Joseph Bell in a TV drama about 15 years ago called The Curious Case of Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes, and he depicted Joseph Bell. Now, coincidentally, Brian Cox visited the library, the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, where I work, and because he was filming a completely separate drama, and I got talking to him. He was a very, very, very nice guy. And he says to me, I understand you've got a collection of material relating to Joseph Bell. And I says, actually, yes, we do. We've got the Joseph Bell collection. He said, no, I just thought he was a Sherlock Holmes fan. And he said, the reason I'm asking is that I'm going to be playing him in a drama that's starting filming in 3 or 4 weeks. I said, all right. I said, and I didn't have the heart or the courage to tell him, you don't look anything like him. You know what I mean? I was thinking the makeup guys are going to have their work cut out making Brian Cox look like Joseph Bell. And sure enough, 4 weeks later when they filmed it, and I finally saw the programme, he hadn't changed a bit. He had a beard. He just didn't look anything like Joseph Bell. But he's a magnificent actor, and he carried the role off superbly, regardless of how little he resembled the man.